Campaign 2020 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Quick Trip, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, and Wisconsin Operating Engineers Local 139.
And we're joined now by Dora Drake, a Democrat from Milwaukee who's running to represent the 11th Assembly District. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure being able to speak with you guys.
It looks like you've done quite a bit of work with reentry programs, and I wanted to get your thoughts on what are some of the main things that you'd work to change about Wisconsin's criminal justice system if you're elected to the legislature.
Absolutely. So like you said, I do have experience in the reentry field for about a year now, but previously I've had 2 years on the other side with pretrial work. And so I've seen both sides in terms of the issues that happen within the justice system prior to people coming involved as well as people coming out. One of my stances that I'm running on is that we should support reentry services. So the things that the state should push is, one, making sure that we are supporting individuals that are charged as soon as they're charged. Is because in my work, at one point I would go into the Milwaukee facility, a detention facility, and we would host group about wellness and what that looks like and how to prepare, when coming out, as well as working with resumes and things of that. And 3 months alone is difficult to develop that support that individuals need to come out. And one of the biggest concerns that I hear, in my line of work is that people are afraid that they won't get the support they need just because they're coming back to communities where there's probably some strained relationships, whether it's with family or friends. On top of that, the stigma of once you're, if you're charged as a felon or even if you have a criminal record, we don't want to hire you. So I want to make sure that the state pushes legislation that would encourage employers to, hire these individuals. And in addition to that, promote other opportunities that they can have before they're released. A lot of it is like, once you're released, well, here you go. Well, no, we want to make sure it's more wraparound. So making sure that they not only have the skills, actually, I take that back, they already have the skills, helping them hone in the skills that they already have, as well as making sure they have housing, transportation, food, and things like that, just so you can actually live. In addition to that, trauma-informed base, facilitating and programming to address those traumas that sort of help them get in the situation in the first place and why they may be involved in the justice system now. So that's one thing I would love to do. And I know a big part of discussion now is also where our funds are going towards law enforcement. Now, I want to be clear that, yes, the police obviously have their job in terms of, enforcing the law and what have you. However, there has been a long history of disenfranchisement when it comes to Black communities, communities of color as well, communities of low income. And so in that, a lot of those funds could be allocated towards proactive measures, making sure they go towards schools, social services, and things like that. So that'd be another thing that I would push as legislator.
One area that the Capitol could really be struggling with is a budget shortfall. Governor Evers has warned that tax collections could fall by as much as $2 billion this year. When it comes to trying to fill that budget hole or balance that, would you be focused on cutting spending or trying to raise taxes and fees to offset that loss? How would you try to address that?
Absolutely. Well, I believe that just because currently with Republican leadership, there's cuts in our budget, and in a time when we need more funding, I believe that that's just not the right answer, especially in the midst of healthcare. We're now put in a position where we realize healthcare shouldn't be tied to our jobs because so many people have lost access to that. So I would support an increase of sales state tax, creating a higher bracket for people that have higher incomes, and looking realistically about what those corporate tax rates are. So in that way, one, we create a more equitable state because at the end of the day, everyone wants to be able to have a decent quality of life. And we should make sure that when it comes to those funding concerns, right, especially with the deficit, we should increase those sales tax versus cutting them.
The Capitol is going to be looking at drawing new district boundaries. Governor Evers has created his People's Maps Commission to try to draw the maps. Republicans who control the legislature want to be the ones to draw them. Who do you think should draw the next set of district boundaries for Wisconsin?
I believe they should be nonpartisan. It's one thing where we encourage people to vote and exercise your right, because we believe strongly in a democracy. However, if we're having districts that are being drawn to cater towards a certain party, then that diminishes the voice of the community and every citizen here in Wisconsin. So I would push for a nonpartisan redistricting, especially if we want to make sure that, especially in time and now where so much is at stake, we want to make sure that communities, every citizen, not only in my district, but in Wisconsin, knows that they are being heard and that is not being toyed for political purposes.
Do you support legalizing medical and recreational marijuana?
So my stance is this: Wisconsin's in the middle of Minnesota and Illinois, which have already legalized it. And so, I do support it for two reasons. One, it'd be another venue where we can get revenue, especially for the state, especially since we're looking at a deficit for the budget. But, two, just from a moral standpoint, too, there have been so many individuals that have been charged with possession of marijuana. And, personally, from what I've seen, if you're caught with it twice, that's a felony. And so morally, it's right not only to, have it so economically we can have more funds for our state, but making sure that we address this is another way to address those social justice issues, and making sure that we not only don't charge anyone that has possession of it, but also don't retrograde as well for those that have been charged with something that people are currently making profit off on.
Do you think, what do you think the legislature should do to address racial inequalities and disparities in Wisconsin?
I think my internet went out for a second, so I can hear your question all the way.
Sorry, can you hear me okay now?
Yes, I can hear you.
What do you think the legislature should do to combat Wisconsin's problems with racial inequalities and disparities? You already talked a bit about the criminal justice system. Is there anything else that you think the legislature could be doing?
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously the criminal justice system is a huge thing. I think the two other stances could be access to economic growth as well as access to quality education. First and foremost, everyone wants to be able to pay a decent job, but having several jobs to make ends meet isn't creating a decent life. Personally, I worked several jobs at one point, and to do that, is stressful, not only physically, but mentally, emotionally, all those things. And so with that, and it does impact, people of color and people that are from low income communities. So with that, we want to make sure that we definitely not only provide access to that, but also promote financial literacy, what it means to own, whether it's home ownership, as well as entrepreneurship. The other side with education, our youth are our future. And so if the state isn't leading in what's best for our children, regardless of where they come from, their background, their family, their situation, then we're doing not only them a disservice, but our state as a whole. And unfortunately, it has shown that we aren't, when I say we, Black communities, colors, things of that, are affected, whether it's being penalized more frequently because we're criminalized more due to being seen as a threat versus the school to prison pipeline and how those small factors lead up to that. And so in order to address racial inequality, not only addressing the criminal justice side of things, but making sure that people have access to economic growth as well as a quality education.
Wisconsin has some of the highest property taxes in the country, and which is why what school districts and local governments can levy in property taxes is limited or capped. They can pass a referendum to try to exceed those caps. But if you're elected, would you vote to keep those property tax caps in place or eliminate them?
Yep. So I do believe in strong local control, right? It's because the local communities, municipalities, and things of that know what's best for, their area. And with that, I would support to eliminate and levy the taxes and things like that, just because we want to make sure that local government still has control and they know what's best in terms of what they need at that time.
One other area that counties and municipalities have been looking at is to try to shift the focus or the reliance on the property tax to look at alternative sources of revenues for local governments. For example, a 50-cent local sales tax. I know Milwaukee and the city and county have been pushing for that. Is that something that you would support, those local sales tax or other alternative sources of revenue?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like I said previously, it really does. It's based on making sure that, one, we make sure that the local governments and municipalities have what they need to best address the issues that they see firsthand. So I would support that as well.
Would you vote to raise this is, I think, the last tax question. Would you vote to raise the gas tax as a way to try to help Wisconsin find a stable way to pay for highways and roads?
Absolutely. So in that, I would definitely say I would want more information on that. That's something that I want to do more on. But in terms of making sure that there's access to not only transportation, but really the question is making sure that we have funds to improve our roads and things like that. So I would also say, in addition to that, taking federal funding when we do receive it to create a regional transit authority that can be in charge of that, so that we can invest and they can be in charge of making sure we have those funds for those needs.
One area that the coronavirus pandemic has hit hard are healthcare providers. Even as hospitals have been playing a key role, they've also been struggling. Do you think would you vote, if you're elected, would you vote to make hospitals a greater priority in the next state budget? And do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, personally speaking, I have family members that are nurses and that are working in the health field. And so I've seen firsthand some of them, test positive for COVID. And in that, that is a reality. And since these are people that continuously serve us, making sure that we're healthy, that we're well, it's only due diligence that we do support, promote funding, not only for our nurses and our doctors that are currently in the hospitals, but also with healthcare as well, because we want to make sure that, again, we should be pushing for increased funding to expand Medicaid and Badger care, especially since so many Wisconsinites lost, access to healthcare due to COVID, since their health insurance was tied to their employment. So I would agree with that. And I would fight for that.
Do you think that businesses that follow all of the prescribed COVID-19 practices and recommendations should be immune from lawsuits?
So if they are following every single CDC guideline and making sure that they are, one, not only keeping their workers safe, but their customers and people that they serve, yes. However, for those that are, because one, that is another way that people are sustaining their lives. And so I understand that. But at the same time, I also don't want to give the notion that this isn't a serious thing. So if there are businesses that aren't following this to the T in terms of what needs to be followed by CDC, as well as what's being ordered in different ordinances and things like that, there needs to be penalties for that. It's because we're dealing with something that none of us have dealt with before. And in that, safety needs to be a priority for everyone.
When local governments authorize public works projects, do you think bidding standards and requirements should give preferences to Wisconsin companies, to local companies?
So it's spaced out as, yeah. So can you repeat the question one more time?
Sure, no problem. Can you hear me okay now?
Yeah.
Okay. When local governments authorize public works projects, do you think bidding standards and requirements should give preferences to Wisconsin-based companies?
Can you repeat that one more time, just so
Sure.
I understand?
Yes. if when local governments are authorizing public works projects for, so it's a publicly funded project, do you think that they should give preference to Wisconsin-based companies?
That I do. And that's something that I'll say that I would definitely look more into on. But in terms of making sure that we have enough, not only enough financially, but we want to support the businesses that we have here. So definitely if that's in the public or private sector, we want to make sure that we're making our businesses here stronger, so that way we have a stronger state.
What do you think makes you the best candidate for the race? I know the primary is 3 weeks away from today. So what do you think sets you apart from your opponents, and why should people vote for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So several reasons. First and foremost, I was actually born and raised in the district. So I've seen firsthand the changes that have happened over the years. And personally, being the first in my family to graduate from Marquette, and deciding to be a social worker, for several years now, I've seen different nuances in how policies can sometimes miss the holes and how it affects people directly, whether that was me as a student, to people that are involved in the justice system, to people that are trying to find housing. And currently, even as a campaign manager last year for an MPS school board race, seeing the gaps that our education system is so desperately in need of, especially when it comes to funding. So one, I'm someone that takes initiative. At my previous job, I initiated racial bias training after the Sherman arrest here in Milwaukee, because I saw a need that we need to make sure our clients were taken care of. And as practitioners, it's our job to make sure that we are responsible in how we respond. So not only do I live in the district, but I'll take initiative. And I'm someone that can work across the table. Because of my work, I've ran into several different individuals that have different belief systems than me. And the thing is, I recognize that not everyone's going to have the same belief. But I can say that there's at least one thing that you and I can agree on. And if we can agree on this one thing, and that's the issue that needs to get done, then let's get it done. We're living in a time where people are so tired of the status quo in politics. And now is the time to really push for that. And which is why, I believe it's going to take all of us to stay, not only to work together, but truly for us to stay united in hope, because that's going to allow us to stay focused on what the ultimate job is. And that's to create a new normal for what's better. And that's why I think I'm the best candidate.
Well, thank you so much for your time. I think we are just about out of time, but I do appreciate you talking with us and answering a bunch of questions. So thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Campaign 2020 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Quick Trip, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, and Wisconsin Operating Engineers Local 139.